Jaune said, as he watched the weapon in Weiss's hand with a weary eye. No more. I beg of you. It's for your own good, Jaune, Weiss said. As she approached, she gestured to the girls on the other side of him. Keep hold of him. Don't let him escape. Their hands clamped down on his shoulders, hard and unyielding. We've got him, Yang said. Jaune struggled limply, but was unable to get out of her hold, let alone Blake's. I can't, he begged. Weiss, please. Be reasonable. You're asking that of me, the heiress snorted as she knelt on the mattress beside him. You have to be the most unreasonable person around, Jaune. I mean, just look at what you're making us do. How am I responsible for this? For the love of... Weiss sighed and planted both her hands on her hips. Jaune, it's a chocolate bar. Most people don't act like they're being executed when presented with one. Most people aren't stuffed with enough food to make them burst, he pointed out, eyes still locked onto the offending mass of sugar and chocolate. Come on, guys. You've already forced so much down me. I can't fit anything else in. 2 scrambled eggs on 2 slices of a toast for breakfast isn't a lot, Blake mumbled from his left. Nor is chicken and vegetable soup and half an apple much of a lunch, Yang agreed. Their hands tightened on his shoulders. We've got him, Weiss. He isn't going anywhere. Good work, girls, Weiss said as she pushed the bar between his teeth and glared at him. Jaune sighed and bit down on it, rolling his eyes when she nodded happily and allowed him to chew in peace. The same scene had been replayed for a few days now, ever since he'd been allowed out of the infirmary. His team took their duties well, and it was impossible to really feel upset at them for it, even if his stomach generally wasn't used to dealing with so much food. He felt stodgy and sluggish, but gone were the days Weiss would huff and let him off with only finishing half a meal. See? Was that so hard? He knew better than to argue. Weiss wasn't afraid to argue back, and she had backup in the form of his treacherous teammates. Even Zui chipped in, but that was just to bite down on his pant leg when he tried to escape. Oh, how he tried to escape. So many times. They were all on top form, almost bizarrely so. The moment he so much as moved a muscle, he could feel eyes on him, and it didn't stop when the lights went out. Blake could see perfectly well in the dark, and seemed to wake up the moment he did, with Zui slumbering on his chest for most nights as well. He would raise the alarm if his bed dared move. Every effort to sneak off would result in Blake tailing him, while Yang and Weiss hovered suspiciously close during meals, walks, and even sitting outside in the sunlight. His trips to the infirmary were done with an escort, and the one time he had managed to give them the slip, he'd run straight into Ruby. Bad enough she'd given him the watery eyes, but when she switched to disappointment, yeah. He sulked back to his caretakers without much as a word. Have you called your family yet? Weiss asked, breaking the silence. Jaune nodded. I've been messaging them, but I haven't called yet. He'd written it off as him being on the mission still, and his parents understood, with the amount of babysitting his team put him through. Writing to his sisters was the only thing he could do. I don't want them to see me like this, he added, pointing to his baggy eyes and pale complexion. I'll do a proper call and my face isn't going to send them into panic mode. So long as they know you're okay, Weiss said. I take it you haven't mentioned what happened to you? Not with Mum pregnant. I don't want them to stress over it. He noticed their stern expression and quickly explained. I'll tell them once I'm better, I swear. It's just... I'd rather not them find out when I can prove I'm better. They'll just worry otherwise. I suppose that makes sense. How is she? The change of topic was a welcome one, not least of all because he could feel his body tingling in an unpleasant manner. Jaune bit down on his lip and took a deep breath before speaking. They're good. Juniper always asks about my lovely teammates and wants to know if you're all doing well. Does she know what the baby will be yet? Human, probably. Jaune quipped. Weiss scowled at him. She doesn't want to know. I think she's fairly certain it will be a girl, since 7 out of 8 have been. But she says it's a surprise she looks forward to the most. Do you have any preference? Yang teased. You looking forward to having another little sister? Or are you aiming for a brother this time? I wouldn't mind either, he said, more than aware of how unlikely he was to see it. There were still a few months left until the expected birth, and there was no way he could survive that long. It hurt, especially because he wasn't sure it would ever happen again. There was little he could do about it. I suppose if I were to pick, I'd want a sister. Another one? Yeesh. In here I thought you'd be after something a little different. Don't tell me you're afraid of not being the only guy in the house. More like I'm afraid he would end up like me. He snorted. From what I can tell, the females of the Ark household get all the brains. Can't argue with that. Weiss sighed. Here, have another bite. Weiss, come. His words were cut off as she pushed the chocolate bar back into his mouth. He'd have refused to eat, but he knew from experience that she would potentially keep it there until it melted, or he gave up. He'd been stubborn the first few times, but she'd just proven her patience and forced him to eat his own words and the chocolate. Now, he'd give up. I think when she said snacks, she meant healthy snacks. Jaune complained once he'd gotten this slickly sweet thing down. Not unless her plan is to rot my teeth and pull them out with her fingers. Jaune paused. Wait. That does sound like a thing she'd do. If you went to her for dentistry, you deserve everything you got. Weiss snorted. Frankly, I'm surprised she's been treating you in a mostly painless ways. She almost seems like a real doctor. She doesn't like drugs. He shrugged. Ah, some professionalism. She doesn't like them because they dull pain. Jaune. Weiss groaned and massaged her forehead. Could you let me have my fantasies for even a few minutes? Please? I almost managed to convince myself we lived in a sane world. No such luck, I'm afraid. He laughed and shifted his hands to his sides. Blake caught one and pulled it out in front of her, eyes narrowed. He cursed and tried to pull it back, but the damage was already done. You're shaking again, Blake said. She looked down on him, worried and nervous, and she squeezed his hand between hers. It's nothing, he gritted, fighting to resist it all. The pangs again? Yang asked. The blonde shifted herself that she was front on to his shoulder and pulled his head into her lap. Is it bad? Not as bad as before. They'd gotten progressively worse for the first day or so, but started to recede. It felt like nothing he could adequately explain. Like the temperature between his blood and his skin was different, or that strange rods had been inserted into his arms. It didn't make much sense, but then again, the withdrawal didn't either. It would be worse if I was actually addicted to them, I guess. Does it hurt? Do you need something to bite down on? Weiss asked. He shook his head and took several short breaths. She asked it every time, and every time his answer was the same. What can we do? Ugh, distract me, he hissed through clenched teeth. Anything, just... I set the kitchen on fire when I was younger, Yang said. She clutched his hand a little tighter but smiled down at him. Back in Signal, I unlocked my semblance in the middle of class one day. They sent me home after I set one of my friend's hair on fire. She wasn't my friend after that. But what can you do? Anyway, I totally didn't take it well since my hair kept glowing and smoking and flames kept appearing. No matter what my dad tried to tell me, I thought the fire was burning me. She shrugged. I thought it was burning my hair too, which was about 10 times worse. Nice priorities. Shush you! I couldn't control it very well at first. They gave you this little pamphlet, you know? Not exactly useful since the moment I touched it, it went up in flames. Even when Dad read it out to me, it said stupid stuff like, stay calm. I mean, come on. Calm? I was on fire. I was anything but calm. Jaune started to laugh. He could imagine her, small and over-dramatic, screaming as she looked at the fire that surrounded her. The image would have been unsettling, but for the knowledge of her semblance. Even as his muscles spasmed and contracted, he fought to listen. My dad tried to calm me down by hugging me, which was a little awkward when he had to stop hugging me to put himself out. Zoe didn't help either. He just kept running around and barking, which doesn't do much for an 11-year-old on fire. What? He grit his teeth and clenched his eyes shut. What happened to the kitchen? Fire safety training. I couldn't hear Dad over my own shouting, and Crow, the bastard, just sat at the dining room table laughing his ass off. Anyway, I remembered what my teachers always said about safety and decided that if I was on fire, I need to stop, drop, and roll. Your kitchen was made of wood, wasn't it? Wise sighed. Try the whole house, Wise screamed. We live in a log cabin. I've never seen Uncle Crow go from laughing to panicking so fast. They were both screaming. I was screaming. Ruby came down and started screaming. It was pretty insane. It sounds like it. Jaune chuckled. His chest rose and fell as he took great gulps of air. But all that reminded of his withdrawal was aching muscles. Thanks, he gasped. I needed that. It's gone now. You can let go. Yang and Blake did so reluctantly, and both refused to let him actually climb from the bed. Not that they had the energy for it anyway. Weiss was no better, watching him with a hawkish expression and her scroll in one hand. He had no doubt it was set to speed dial the infirmary. I hate watching that, she said. It makes me feel so useless. You're not useless. None of you are. Jaune shook his head and winced when his bones cracked. How do people go through this normally? I doubt it's ever this bad, Blake said. You took far more than anyone would have, and those who are addicted likely take more to avoid these very symptoms. At least we can rest assured you won't go take any more. And put him through this a second time? No thanks. I suppose that's the difference between mental and physical addiction. My body is affected, or at least it thinks it is, but I have no actual desire to take them. In that, at least, he was lucky. It was so insidious, so powerful. Part of him felt he could look at those trying to break their habits with newfound respect. He doubted many of them had three wonderful friends, willing to do anything in their power to help him. Thanks for helping, he added, when he saw their confused expressions. You can thank us by getting better. Weiss smiled. And that means full meals, proper sleep, and not doing anything silly. Yes, dear. Jaune tried to make his voice teasing, but it came out with a mingled yawn. He blinked past it, only to see the ceiling. It took him a second to realize Yang had already started to pull him down. Well, it's only a yawn. Nap time, Yang said happily, pushing his head back so he rested in her lap. Oh, come on. A yawn means you're tired, and that means you need rest, Daddy, she teased. Didn't you just finish telling us how thankful you were for all our hard work? I feel like you've added a few more details onto that, he said, glowing up at her. Anyone else might have been thrilled to use a beautiful girl's lap as a pillow, but it felt like he'd only been awake for 4 hours since the last nap. He was tired, sure, but this was ridiculous. I'm not a baby, he growled, and then cursed when he felt how heavy his eyes were. Not now, body. I'm trying to prove a point and win a pointless argument. Don't betray me, damn it! It was no use. His body was exhausted, his muscles sore, and the food that filled his stomach made him feel too heavy to move. He yawned once more, caught it, but then surrendered as a second, more powerful yawn broke through. Yang's soft hands brushed against his cheeks, then ghosted over his eyes, making him shut them. Cheater, he grumbled. Yep, she giggled. Nighty-night, Dad. Of course, I had to have annoying, stubborn daughters. Weiss watched with a fond smile as Jaune slowly fell asleep on his teammate's lap. The lines in his face, made all the more prominent from his ordeal, seemed to fade and drift away. It was the most relaxed she'd seen him in days, and she nodded approvingly at Yang. The girl winked back. I got a lot of practice when Ruby was younger. If you think he's bad, you should have seen how much Ruby hated being told it was bedtime. I can well imagine, Weiss said. The girl was hyperactive as a 15-year-old, so there was no telling what she'd been like as a child. He ate the protein bar at least. I'm surprised he mistook it for a normal chocolate bar. Those things aren't exactly the nicest things. Too chewy? Yang agreed. Then again, I don't think I've ever seen him eat snacks before. I guess he's forgotten what normal chocolate tastes like. That withdrawal attack seems shorter than the last one. Or is that just wishful thinking on my part? No, Weiss agreed. The relief that washed over her was welcome, and enough to bring a wide smile to her lips. They don't last as long as they used to, even if he gets them a little more often. From what research I can find, that's supposed to be a good thing. Still sucks to watch him go through it though. Yes, it did. The first few times had been the worst, both for him and for them. He hadn't been prepared for it and couldn't understand what was happening, while they panicked in turn and were just about as useless in helping him. The blind leading the blind, they argued, until he bit his tongue so hard it bled and the shake slowly drifted away. They'd gotten better over the past few days, but it didn't get rid of that same frustration. She wished this was some enemy that they could fight, something they could deal with through skill and determination. But it wasn't, and all their training was useless. All they could do was stay close by and offer comfort as he rode it out himself. Distracting him seems to help. Blake piped up. Maybe I should find some books for him to read, or ones to read to him. Not mine, she added defensively when they looked her way. Might as well be. Yang grinned. It's not like he doesn't know what sex is. I'm not reading those kinds of scenes to someone like your father. I didn't say that, Yang. But you meant it. The blonde laughed at Blake's scowl. Chill. I don't mean it in a bad way. I know what you mean. He isn't, but he's something else. Something close to it, but without a word to explain it. I'd say he's like an older brother, but that doesn't quite fit. It's more like an older brother whose opinion is more important than usual. Like an older brother who raised you when your parents died. Blake filled in. Yeah. I guess that's as good as fit as any. Doesn't fit as well though. So, I'm gonna keep calling him Dad. Idiot. Blake sighed. Just try to avoid setting the room on fire. Oi! I was a kid! Wait, you mean that story was true? We can't all have easy semblances, Yang grumbled. She looked like she might have tackled Blake but didn't want to move Jaune now that he was peacefully slumbering. Some people get convenient things like clones. I get my body going up in flames. You should have seen Ruby though. Yang sighed and shook her head. The body isn't really ready to suddenly go from normal to super speed with no warning, nor to do it in reverse. It was lucky she had her aura, or she'd have hurt herself with all the times she ran into walls, misjudging how long it would take her to slow down, tripped, or misunderstood the physics of momentum when running up to hug people. Weiss winced at the thought of a small girl crushing into her at goodness knows how many miles per hour. Compared to that, her glyphs seemed wonderfully simple. Of course, she had the benefit of the best teachers money could buy. Well, at least Blake cut off and looked down towards their leader. He's having another nightmare, she hissed. Jaune's face flinched just the slightest bit, the lines about his eyes tightening. There were never obvious things, and sometimes it felt like Blake was the only one to notice them. Or not, it appeared, as Wee pushed his nose up under the man's chin. Hey, Yang whispered and touched his hair. It didn't seem to help. Should we wake him? I know he needs his sleep, but... No, he needs sleep. Weiss leaned across to place a hand against his forehead. Jaune's temperature was high, but not unbearably so. She moved her hand down to his cheek as she tried to think of some way to help, but his movements began to still entirely. "Well done," Blake said. I didn't do anything." "Well, whatever you didn't do helped." Blake smiled to show she didn't mean any insult. "It feels like he has these nightmares every time." "He has good reason to," Yang said. "All I say is that Torquid should count himself lucky he died. If I could get my hands on him after what he did." Weiss nodded. "I know, Yang. We all feel the same. Believe me." The three of them sat there for the next 10 minutes or so, content to talk quietly between themselves as Jaune slept. His naps were often too deep to awaken from easily, but he didn't have any more nightmares and seemed at peace for once. Eventually, however, a knock at the door interrupted them. Weiss left to open it, and blinked in surprise at who was outside. "Oh, Winter." Weiss blinked at her older sister. "Do you want to come in?" "I wouldn't want to intrude," the older woman said pleasantly. "I can see your partner is taking some rest and I don't want to interrupt. I was wondering if I could borrow you for a little while, Weiss?" "Borrow her?" Weiss bit her lip and looked back to her team. Yang caught her eyes and shrugged. "We'll be fine," the blonde said. "He's not going anywhere and Ruby and Nora made him promise to play games with them later, so they'll keep an eye on him. Go and talk with your sister." "You sure?" "Go on, Weiss. We won't let anything happen to him," Blake promised.